This contribution to the panel on theorising higher education draws on Suellen's 2012 paper, Educational Development as a Field, Are We There Yet? And also on a literature review that I did for the South African Chair on Teaching and Learning. I used Suellen's paper to structure that literature review. My contribution to the panel is to try to respond to Suellen's question of whether AD as a field is there yet. My answer is not yet, but it's an incomplete answer as I pose questions, and I'm really hoping that this symposium will allow me to begin to think through those questions more thoroughly and complete the paper for which I've submitted an extended abstract. As you know, Suellen's 2012 paper makes a claim that much of the work produced in South African academic development is craft knowledge or codified practice. And in doing this, she draws on a term that Ian Scott originally used. I know that Paul Ashwin disagrees with Suellen on this, but I think it's important to take into account that Suellen was mostly referring to South African work in her paper, and I'm not convinced that the principles that Suellen was referring to are the same as those Paul refers to in his contribution to the symposium. I think Suellen's observations came from years of engagement in the field in South Africa as it is practiced, and that they are supported by the observations of others, including, for example, James Garraway and Viv Bozilek, who write in their introduction to a special edition of a journal about the show and tell presentations that tend to dominate teaching and learning conferences in this country. And I'd argue that conferences on teaching and learning in other countries are also dominated by show and tell work. There's no time in this presentation to draw on the argument for knowledge produced in South African AD as craft knowledge, but suffice to say that it draws on a schema on the screen now, Suellen adapted from the work of Jean Gamble, a colleague at UCT. Following Bernstein's distinction between horizontal and vertical discourse, Suellen's criticism of a lot of AD work is that it's weighed down by the context in which it is produced. Her call is for the production of systematized knowledge that will travel across contexts, production which would involve the use of a range of theoretical lenses to look at objects of interest in the field. In calling for systematized knowledge, Suellen is looking for work that can reconceptualize problems. And of course, the idea of reconceptualizing is key to the transformation sought in South African higher education for so long. My contribution looks at work that has been produced. And I'll draw on a few examples of existing work to demonstrate what has been done. Suellen's own work and that of her doctoral student Jeff Javits on assessment is but one example. Suellen and Jeff both use Bourdieu to show how assessment is messy, situated, and complicates the neat set of assessment principles that Suellen refers to as being taught in formal courses in South Africa. Other people have used different theoretical lenses to look at assessment. Karen Ellery, for example, uses UCT to show how the ideal knower envisaged by assessors is very different to students in the courses she teaches. The work of Margaret Archer has been used extensively in AD research. Kasturi Bihari-Leek and Lynn Quinn both use Archer to trouble assumptions about the impact of professional development courses on teaching practice. Kathy Luckett, Tembi Luckett, Jenny Case, Delia Marshall, Sue McKennell and others, including me, have used Archer to look at student agency. Again, this work I would argue, succeeds in contributing to the reconceptualization of problems that have long obsessed AD practitioners in this country. But there are two big problems, and I've by no means covered it all. There are two big problems with the work done to date. The first is that existing work has mostly been produced by a small group of researchers working mainly in privileged universities. And this work tends to draw on interactions with students who are registered at these same institutions, leaving a gap in our knowledge about teaching and learning and students in other kinds of universities. The second enormous problem is that all the work that I've been able to locate draws on theory generated in the global north. Of course, scholars such as Kasturi Bahari-Leek call for work drawing on indigenous knowledge and ways of knowing. But, and I may be blind here, I haven't been able to find any which draws on indigenous knowledge and ways of knowing to explore teaching and learning in our universities and to do the reconceptualization Suellen calls for. So what you have is the way the research has been produced by this small group of researchers and the fact that it's drawing on theory generated in the north or in the global north, you've got a collision producing an even greater problem, I think. So 10 years on, I'd argue we're still not there yet. We still need to find a way forward to address the collision. Siseko Kamalo argues that the production of systematized African knowledge is work for African scholars for the next decade at least. How could this work begin to proceed? I don't have any answers, but I'm very eager to engage with the thinking of others in the symposium on this. Thank you.